So I reckon we could be looking at the automotive shock of 2011, the remarkably un-Italian sounding Ferrari FF, which is a bit of a shocker, A, because it's an estate, and B, because it's four-wheel drive, which is a first for a production Ferrari. Before we go for a drive, I want to talk you through some of the technical highlights. Under the bonnet, we've got a next generation 6.2 litre V12 producing 651 brake horsepower. But it's how that power is channeled to the road that's particularly clever with the FF. For the majority of the time, it's sent through a transaxle 7-speed dual clutch gearbox. But when drive's required at the front axle, power is taken off the front of the engine into what's effectively a second gearbox with 2 speeds and reverse. Now, I could spend the next 5 minutes attempting to explain the theory, but the headlines are it's extremely compact and light. Ferrari saying it adds just 45 kilos to the car. We'll see how well it works later, but for the moment we have to head to the back of the car. Because the FF has got a 450 litre boot, which has proved big enough for all our stuff today, and inside you've got 2 pretty usable rear seats, and the fuel tank's 91 litres, making this a pretty credible Grand Tourer. But for me, the big question is what something so far removed from the regular Ferrari template will be like to drive. We've got the rest of the day to find out. And the initial impressions are good. Despite the FF weighing nearly 1.8 tonnes dry, its 0 to 200 click time, that's 0 to 124 miles an hour, it's exactly the same as the 599. The engine might not be quite as sort of ballistic at the top end. This revs to 8,000 rather than the 8,400 of the 599, but in the real world, the cross-country pace is even faster in the FF. And that's because of the traction you get with this four-wheel drive system. For example, we're coming to a hairpin now, we'll go down to first gear. That's full throttle. And I'm sure the traction control's managing it, but there's no real interruption in the power, and just the propulsion out the corner is staggering. Now the questions for me with the four-wheel drive system are, can you feel it acting on the car, and what does it do to the steering? Answer to the first question is you very rarely feel the system directing the power to the front axle. You can feel what it does, the result, how it affects the cornering line. You can feel it pulling the car straight if you're sliding about a little bit. What does it to the steering? Well, it doesn't actually affect the steering feel at all because it's very rarely acting on the front axle. But while we're talking about the steering, what you need to know is the steering's very, very quick on this car. It's almost as fast as that in the 458, which is somewhat surprising for such a GT-focused car. Apart from the quickness to the steering, the FF is a very easy car to live with. It does make a very good GT car because the ride's pretty good. As we've said, there's actually a surprising amount of space and flexibility in here. And because you've got that traction, for a car with this level of performance, and remember it's got 651 brake horsepower, it's not that intimidating to drive. And earlier on we tried it on the snow to see how well it copes with slippy conditions, which it did very well, meaning in theory you could use an FF throughout the year. Downsides to the FF, well for me the 7-speed dual clutch gearbox isn't quite as slick in this as it is in Ferrari's V8 engines cars. At the top end, the changes aren't quite as quick, and occasionally the take-up during slow-speed manoeuvring could be smoother. Other than that, the downside really is, impressive as the four-wheel drive system is, if you're the sort of person that gets a kick out of managing the traction, managing the power in a car, the FF doesn't really offer much in the way of interaction. So how does the four-wheel drive estate Ferrari stack up? Well, I reckon if you can get on with the somewhat Marmite looks, the packaging changes make sense and really add to the appeal of a four-seat Ferrari. And the four-wheel drive system, well, I can understand why they've done it. It is a very clever system, but for me, it does detract slightly from the appeal of a Ferrari. Overall, though, the interesting thing about the FF is its absence of a direct rival. Now, that could be for a reason, or because Ferrari struck on a piece of genius. And I think that's something only its customers can answer.